All right, I think we're live. Bonjour tout le monde, nous sommes ici avec Pierre, James et Katie. On va faire cette vidéo en anglais parce que James ne parle pas français, donc je passe directement en anglais. Hi everybody. Today or tonight we're here with Pierre, Katie, James and myself to talk about the French launch of Blood on the Clocktower. So before we get started, just to let you know what's going to happen tonight, we're just going to chat about the game, ask some questions to Jams, who is part of the editing team in Australia, who helped promote the original game, and talk about the things that we like about the game. So just to get started, can we all just go around and say a little thing about your role, your link with Blood on the Clocktower. So I will start. So I'm Claire. I work at Open Sesame Games doing project management and translation towards English because I am native. I'm an American. And I also run a board game cafe in Paris. Pierre, do you want to tell us a little bit about you?
I'm a big fan of the game. I've been playing it for 2 years. I just discovered it watching some YouTube videos, and I fell in love with it right away. It looked so fascinating, so I thought I want to play this game as fast as possible. And then I basically binge watched a ton of videos, and eventually I wanted to be able to play in person. So I started playing online a lot with players from mostly British players, and then I wanted to be able to play in person. So I started a community around 2 years ago here in Paris, and when we started, it was just me storytelling once every 2 weeks or so, and now we have many players, also more storytellers, and we're running a regular game. So that's really nice to see how the game is getting more and more popular here in France.
Mm-hmm. Have you noticed a big increase in players over the past 2 years?
Oh yeah, for sure. Recently we have had a lot of big increase in players. Okay. So we are trying to run more sessions, but yeah.
Great. Katie, do you want to tell us about yourself?
Yeah, so my name's Katie. I have a YouTube channel called Board Game Siren, and I first discovered the game obviously watching the Blood on the Clocktower team and TPI playing the game online. And I was so invested from the start that I was like, okay, I need to get on the plane and get to the UK to go play this game. But I realized it'd be cheaper if I actually ordered the game and ran it for my friends. So I've been running games for a while now for people in France, so in French. And we put the games we play in person online for everyone else to be able to get a feel for the game and hopefully join the community.
So you started storytelling right when you got the game. Had you ever played before you story told?
So fun fact, I had never played, and I still to this day have never played a game myself upon the Clocktower. I only storytell. Okay. That is only because it's very new in France. And I haven't played online yet, so I'm sort of waiting for my friends to pick it up, and then I'll be able to play a game.
All right, good plan. Thank you, Katie. And Jams, do you want to tell us about what you do with the Pandemonium Institute?
Sure. So I mostly work on game design with the Pandemonium Institute. I meet regularly with the game's original designer, Stephen Medway, and the two of us basically talk about all of the different things that we want to put into the game. So recently we, in English, released the Carousel, which is a big expansion pack of all of the characters that are not found in the base game. And so that was a huge project for Stephen and myself, where basically I was told, you need to make sure that all of the text for every single character that's going to go in this is 100% correct, and that we know exactly how many leaves are going to go on every token, and make sure everything's spelled correctly and that the art matches up and all of these different little things. And so I manage kind of all of, when we're making new content, manage the logistics and admin of the design side of things, and then I also run all of our testing for new characters. And so when we have characters that we want to test out and see how they're going, see if we want to add them to the game, I will get a group of players together and then run a bunch of games, get some feedback based on whether or not it looks like they're having fun mostly, and then then the things that work out really well we end up adding to the game, which is super fun.
Awesome. I love your t-shirt. Did you join the company before or after the original game was launched on Kickstarter?
I joined the company after the original game was launched. I played my first game of Clocktower. It was a very strange situation. It was during COVID, and online there was somebody who was running a text-based game, which I would not recommend to anyone. But they were running a text-based game, and they said, we need somebody to come and step in because someone doesn't have the time to play this game. Everyone else I know already knows who's what character. Can you come and take their place? And I was like, okay, fine, sure. Like, I don't really have the time, but I can do this. And they were like, great, thank you so much. You're the demon. Here's how it works. And it was terrifying and crazy, but it was so much fun. And I was instantly hooked. So I started playing, I think it was like early 2021. And then in maybe a year or so after that, just happened to meet Evan, who's one of the managers of the game, and he's Australian, and we met in Vancouver, of all places, basically helping to show the game at a board game convention there. And he said, I'm going to go back to Australia and tell Stephen that we should hire you. And so that's when I started working for the company.
Okay, so you really started working on Carousel.
Yeah, I started working essentially, like the base game was already out. I wasn't involved in the development, but I was involved in a lot of the refinement of the base game. So when we were going back through making sure that jinxes worked the way that we wanted them to, and then in the development of the Loric, which are the new like storyteller fun characters. That was a big project that Stephen and I worked on together.
Yeah, great. We are really excited about Carousel. It was one of the things that we were crossing our fingers to be able to bring it to the French public. And so we're super happy about that. Pierre and or Katie, do either of you play with the experimental characters? And if so, do you have one that you like in particular?
Oh, that's a good question. Yeah, I play a lot with the experimental characters, so that's why I was very excited to. That's what that was one of my first questions, whether or not like the carousel would be included in the French version. So I'm happy to see that it is. I think like I don't have like one character, one favorite character. Like I have more like some how you say, like I have. Like my momentary, like my current favorite character is like the High Priestess. I really like the High Priestess.
The High Priestess. Can you tell us what the High Priestess does for those of us that don't
know the
High
Priestess is a character like where as the storyteller you would let the person know like which player they should go and talk to on the next day. So it's a very social character, which I really liked. It's very different. It's not hard mechanical information. Is more, it allows you to play on the social games, for example, like get see what happens in the game and get like maybe a shy player who has some like good insight in the game, like get them to like speak more and send the High Priestess to talk to them, or maybe send the High Priestess to disrupt the evil team communication by when the evil team like want to speak to each other. So it's like it's very social character, and I think it's a really nice thing.
Okay. What about you, Katie? Do you play with the experimental characters at all?
Funnily enough, I just received the carousel in the post today. So I will be playing, and I'm really excited. I think these are experimentals, like the Preacher, if I'm not wrong. Yeah, there we go. Preacher, I love the idea of being able from the start to put a halt to the evil team, and they just spend the whole game being like, okay, which person do we need to take out so that I can have my power? So I'm very much looking forward to the extra chaos it's going to bring to my games.
Okay, great. So Jams, can you tell us anything about the two characters that Pierre and Katie just mentioned, about developing those, and what were the difficulties in making those characters work?
Yeah, absolutely. So I'll start with the Preacher, because the Preacher was a very tricky one to make work because it's just so powerful. Anyone who can all they do is point, and if they get lucky on the first night of the game, instantly that minion's ability doesn't work anymore, which is a really big challenge for the evil team to overcome. So we wanted to make sure that would still be fun for players, that when an evil player was picked, that exactly that happens, that it's not, oh no, I don't have an ability and now I'm just a regular boring old minion and the game is terrible. You want to actually have that feeling of, okay, something terrible has happened, but I can do something about it. And so trying to strike that right balance of, when should the Preacher's ability go away? What can the evil team do to fight it? But also knowing that it's a social game. I think it was a really nice resolution to make sure that if the preacher did a really, really, really effective job hiding, they would be rewarded for that by allowing their ability to last longer. So it gives the preacher a reason to stay alive and to lie, and we always want reasons for good players to lie. But in general, one of the things when we are designing characters, one of the main things we're looking at is, does this character give the players a reason to talk? Because at its core, Blood on the Clocktower is a talking game, and we want to foster as much conversation and as much talking as possible. And so with the preacher in particular, it gives the players so many reasons to talk, because it gives that preacher reasons to find other good players to trust because they want to stay alive, they don't want to be executed. But it also gives that preacher so many reasons to lie because they want to hide, who they are so that they can live and have their power for longer. And then it gives the evil players lots of reasons to talk as well, because they're trying to figure out, can we suss out, who this preacher is so we can get rid of them as soon as possible. So it's a really good character in terms of fostering conversation and making that work. And then the High Priestess is also, I think, at least for townsfolk, probably my favorite of the released characters. And I actually recently designed a character based off of the High Priestess that now is becoming one of my favorite unreleased characters. But the High Priestess is again similarly it is the definition of fostering conversation, because quite literally the entire character's ability is each day the storyteller says, you should talk to this person. And what I love about it is that it puts a new spin on what it means to receive information, because it's not just, let's tell you this person, you should talk to this person because they're the fortune teller and they learned who the demon is. But it's, you should talk to this person because maybe they have something important to share that they haven't shared yet. Or maybe they're quieter and you wouldn't normally talk to them, but that can be quite useful. Or they're a minion and they're just, they're telling something that might actually be helpful to the good team, but they don't realize it. And if you talk to them, they might get trapped in a corner and have a harder time wiggling their way out. And so with the High Priestess, I think the hardest part was trying to figure out how not to write the ability text for it, but how to actually write the almanac entry for that character in a way that really gave a lot of space to what we wanted the High Priestess to be. Because we saw, even when we were testing it, players who would interpret it as, oh, I'm getting pointed to this person because they have correct information or they have very useful information. And we really wanted to emphasize that it's not really about the information that the player has gotten as much as it's about that player believing in the right worlds, or having interesting things to talk about, or having something that you haven't talked about yet. So for example, we had a game where an investigator on the first night got really useful information about one of the minions, and they kind of correctly figured out which one was the minion, which one was the good player. But we also, we knew that player, and we were like, he's just going to tell everyone. The High Priestess doesn't need to talk to him because they're already going to get that information. They can go talk to somebody who's staying quieter about their role. Maybe it's a banshee or a sage, somebody who wants to die in the night and they need some help bluffing. So yeah, I think it was tricky from not the perspective of actually designing the character, but of communicating the intent of that character to the people who are going to run it and the players who are going to play with it.
So that's an interesting thing that you bring up. Pierre, do you have something to say about that?
Go ahead.
Okay. So I was going to say that I've played with Pierre before, and I've seen his version of the Trouble Brewing script that he made in French, because the French version hasn't come out yet. And Pierre, you added a couple things to the French version to help new players. Can you talk about what the different things that you added to the Trouble Brewing script were to help players that are getting started?
You mean to the character sheet?
To
sure.
the character sheet.
After I have some follow-up questions to just, but yeah, sure. I mean, I just added a few. I think the role, the role setup, like the number of outsiders and townsfolk and minions for each player counts, because that's a question we get a lot. And just a few, maybe I added a few also, at the bottom of the page, some clarification about the drunkenness and poisoning, and clarification about what's up to the storyteller. For example, the registering as evil for the recluse or as good for the spy. This kind of stuff, because people always ask this question. So I added just a little role clarification that it's up to the storyteller. This kind of things. Yeah.
Okay. What about you, Katie? Do you play with the do you have things that you specifically add when you present Trouble Brewing to players? Do you have things that you've added to the character sheets?
Honestly, I don't add anything. I just make sure that everyone understands, hey, if you have a question, come ask me. We can talk about it any point during the game. I set out how many townsfolk there's supposed to be, how many outsiders there's supposed to be. And then it really is just a question of taking 5 minutes before, having a chat with everyone. And I've also, because most of the content so far is in English, I've made a short video that lasts under 6 minutes that explains the game also in French, so that if anyone's interested, anyone's new to the game, they can watch that instead of what I have done in the past, spend an hour and a half explaining the game before being actually able to play it. So I think just setting like the base of there's going to be a phase, a day phase, a night phase, and this is how we vote just helps a lot before actually starting the game. But otherwise, I just run Trouble Brewing as it is in its glorious form and watch the chaos unfold.
Okay. And I've seen your video. I did think it was really great for explaining the rules.
Oh, thank you.
So my follow-up question to that, Jams, is you talked about finding the right way to present a character in the almanac. What is the right balance between giving just enough information to not overwhelm players and making sure everybody knows really clearly what is the potential of that character and what can they do?
Yeah, this is the trickiest part of designing the entire game, I think, because it's such a fine line to make sure that things are accessible to new players, especially. That's been one of our core focuses designing the game from the beginning, is how do we make sure that somebody who is playing this game for the first time can read one line of an abilities text, or that it fits on a token, and just understand, okay, this is what I do. Or maybe I have a question to clarify something, but in general, I get the vibe of what I'm doing. And so with character abilities, one of the main just sort of like standards that Steven set for the characters was every character's ability must fit on the token and must fit on one line of a script if it was printed just vertically with everything down in rows. And so that makes it really, really difficult, because basically it gives you about, I would say, 125 characters to write an ability text, which is very little. If you go into a character counter and just type something out, you'll be shocked at how quickly it ends, because you're like, oh no, this is not a lot to be able to explain, how this thing works. And so it makes it really, really challenging, because every character has to be essentially really simple in how it works if you're going to just explain it on a face value. And then the almanac exists to say, okay, you might have some questions because that wasn't very much. That was just this, this little, like, this is how this works. And some characters are pretty straightforward. But then others, we have to add different things. For example, the soldier in Trouble Brewing, the ability is quite simple. It just says you are safe from the demon. Mm-hmm. But then you have to understand, in order to really understand what that means, you have to have a definition for safe, which we actually don't yet. And so you have to have, in the almanac, you have to explain, like, what does it mean to be safe, and what does it mean to be safe from the demon versus safe from other abilities, and how does that impact what's happening? Another example, I know Steven and I have talked quite a lot about the cheffe ability, which in English uses the word pairs to explain players who are sitting next to each other. That is one of the most common questions we get when we're running games of Trouble Brewing, is what is pairs? What is a pair? And lots of really common misinterpretations where somebody says, oh, so pairs of evil players, that means how many evil players there are total in the game. Well, everyone knows that. This is a 9-player game. We all know there's 2 evil players. So why would that be useful information? And not understanding that, no, it's whether or not they're next to each other, which is also really fun thematically, because the chef ability, the whole theming of it is the idea that the chef has their restaurant and they're looking around in the restaurant to see who's dining together. And so that's why it's the chef pairs, because it's looking around in the restaurant to see, are the evil players, are they sitting together at the same table, or are they split up across the different tables in the restaurant? Okay. Which is just like fun little thematic stuff. Yeah. But yeah, quite hard.
Pierre?
Yeah, and I ask a follow-up questions like on what you just talked about, because what's really great about Clocktower is it's a game that's where the complexity is more up to the storyteller and not up to the player. So the players can start the game like really quickly, and it's like up to storyteller to deal with like all the shenanigans and interactions. you are like mentioning about the high priestess, the fact that you need to clarify with storytellers like how it's kind of supposed to be run, or what's at least the design or the philosophy behind it. Because there are lots of like unofficial storyteller guides on the internet. Like for the high priestess, I was reading some. I think it's Emma who wrote it, like a really nice guide that I really enjoyed. And I was wondering if you guys, and same for like there are other complex characters like Legion or ATS, which are really rely on the storyteller to work. Like, are you planning to have a kind of official version of these guys, like as a storyteller extension of the almanac or something like this, or like for the more complex characters where it's like they are like a little bit more for the storyteller to understand like on how to run them, or I was wondering.
Yeah. So for a couple of the characters, we already have an official guide like that. I know I think it's the Legion, Atheist, and Yagababble right now are the 3 guides that I can remember. Plus there's a guide specifically for Madness. So it's not specific to the Cerenovus or the Mutant or the Pixie, but it's more generally about what is the intention behind Madness's mechanic? How can I best run it as a storyteller? How should I play with it as a player? And so it's hard to find time to do those on top of everything else because it's very unlikely that they'd ever become printed materials. And if we do have them exist online, there's a question of, do we put these in the do we put them somewhere else? But when we do have a character, so when we released the Yagababble, for example, I spent quite a lot of time writing up a long guide to explain to people, it's really fun, really interesting character. The Yagababble is a demon, and their ability is you learn a phrase, and every time you say that phrase, the storyteller will keep track, and they can kill up to that many players each day and night, which is a crazy character, but really, really tricky to run because the storyteller needs to be able to have a phrase that kind of hits the right balance between being easy to say, but not so easy that the good team will never figure it out, but not so hard that the evil team can never say it. And then you need to be able to keep track of when they're saying this phrase, and you need to make sure that you balance the kills that you're making on behalf of this player. So it becomes quickly much more complicated than it sounds. And so we put together a big guide for that. And then for other characters, I think if we think that the players are going to be able to kind of take a character and engage with it themselves and then develop the different ways that they play with it. Like the High Priestess, I think one of the things that's been nice is seeing how people interpret it and then seeing how people refine that based on their experience. So people who do run the High Priestess as more of a, that person got good information, go and talk to them. Very quickly, those players develop a meta of, well, if the High Priestess learned that player, probably it's a good player because this person isn't running the High Priestess in a way that allows the High Priestess to learn evil players. Then all of a sudden the players are using this meta of, oh, the High Priestess just gets a steward ping every night. They just learn a good player every night. And then the storyteller, if they're a good storyteller, hopefully is like, wait a second, my players are metaing this information in a way that makes the game less balanced. Let me fix that. Let me rethink how I do this. And so I think a lot of players and storytellers are able to organically develop that understanding of how that works. But for some of the more complicated ones, especially for anything where the storyteller has to make decisions that have really, really powerful implications for the rest of the game, and particularly for the balance of the game, we do try and give a little bit more of a, hey, this might help. We also have been working on developing storyteller training courses where people will be able to sign up and take a course. And so the beginner courses are more of just a general, helpful information to get you started and to make you feel comfortable when you're storytelling, and lots of different tips and tricks on that front. But then the advanced courses are all just, here's a character that's hard to storytell. Let's talk about it. Let's make it a little bit easier. And so I think between those resources, I would personally love to go and say here's a guide for every tricky character in the game, in the book. But I also know that I don't have time to do that right now. So maybe one day. But yeah.
So, Katie, you do a lot of storytelling. What is your main tip for people that want to storytell?
So a bit like what Jam said, start by reading the almanac. Like that's going to be your biggest help. It has all the basics you're going to need. Then I'd say watch a video or two on YouTube of people actually playing the game, because then you can get a feel for what it's going to be like being the storyteller as opposed to maybe a player. Take your time. I know it sounds crazy, and I know we feel a bit of pressure, especially during the night phases, to want to go really fast. But just take a quick breath, check you've woken up everyone, and then when you feel good, wake everyone up. They won't mind. They're grooving. They're fine. You will make mistakes. That's fine. We all make mistakes. Most of the time, you can just rectify it if it's something small. And if it's something huge, it just means you're going to have to play another game of Blood on Clocktower. And let's face it, that's not too bad, is it? And then, yeah, just remind players that they can come to you at any time if they have any questions. We can talk out as a group or one-on-one, perfectly fine. And I'd say the most important, have fun. Enjoy yourself. Because if you're enjoying yourself, the players will have fun. And then it's just a great experience.
Okay, thank you. And Jams, we had a couple questions come in from the live viewing audience here. Someone has mentioned that that you have mentioned at TPI having some updates for the base 3 almanacs. And like you mentioned, certain questions about always people asking what the chef does, what are pairs. Could we talk about that at some point and see if we can integrate any of those updates into the French version?
Yeah, we're constantly going and iterating on the game to see kind of what can we do to make sure that it's as accessible and new player friendly as possible. I know that Stephen has mentioned to me wanting to just do sort of a broader review of all of the content in the game, including the base 3 almanacs and the rule books and everything like that, just to see, you know, is everything the way that we want it to? One of the really interesting consequences of releasing experimental characters is that they obviously are not just going to be played with in a purely experimental setting, but people will make, you know, custom scripts. You can go on the script tool, make your own script out of whatever characters you like and put everything together. And so we've had, you know, people who put an experimental character on a script with a base script character, and all of a sudden we go, wait a second, this base character works in a way we didn't plan it to, because we wrote this in the context of Trouble Brewing, or we wrote this in the context of Sex and Violence. And so we do want to go back at some point, but that's going to be a much later term project.
Okay.
But when that happens, we would be passing that along to all of our translation partners so that your translations of the game can match the way that the English game works, and make sure that all of those characters are consistent across all editions.
Okay, great. And one of the other questions that we got on Discord this week was, what is the character that has had the most iterations?
Oh, that's a really good question, because there's a lot. I think I'll give a couple examples of fun ones rather than just pick one, because there's so many that lots of characters start as one idea and then they constantly change and iterate. And I mean, even now I'm thinking about some of the characters we have in development where the way that they look now is completely different to what they looked like 6 years ago. And there are, you know, folks out there who have their hands on some of our older unreleased characters who are going, oh, well, this works in a really interesting way. And I'm like, that hasn't worked that way for years. But for example, the Goon is a really fun example from Bad Moon Rising. The Goon, for a very long time, was a character where, as an outsider, their ability now is each night, the first player to pick you with their ability is drunk, and you become their alignment. So if an evil player picks you, their ability doesn't work, but the price of their ability not working is that you become evil and you get to join them. Or if a good player picks you, you know, you're harming the good team by drunking that useful good player, but you then stay on the good team. So it's a really interesting balance. For a very long time, the Goon's ability was not restricted to the first person that picked them. And so rather than just the first person that picked them and the Goon becoming that team, the Goon, every single time they were picked, would make that person drunk and join their team. So they'd spend the whole night being like, you're evil. Oh, you're good now. You're evil again. But now you're good again. And then there's like 4 drunk players. And so that was a very, very, very different time. Similarly, the Fangu from Sex and Violence, when the Fangu killed a player, the older versions of the Fangu did not restrict it to 1 jump per game. So if you had a pit hag who could make more outsiders and a Fangu who could continue jumping to those outsiders, you could just play this game of, oh, can we stop the Fengu before we are literally outnumbered? Because the Fengu could just continue jumping throughout the game and just keep, dying and making a new demon. Another one is the Sailor, which the older version, rather than the Sailor player choosing whether or not they, I'm going to pick a player and the storyteller will decide who's drunk. The older Sailor was just, the Sailor would pick if they wanted to be drunk or not. And if they picked to be sober, then an arbitrary player on the storyteller's discretion would become drunk. And so that was a very interesting balance, because it completely changed the way that the Sailor played, because rather than go to a specific player and say, hey, Katie, I don't know if you think your ability's working or not, because I picked you last night and I'm trying to figure out which one of us is drunk, the Sailor would have to go around and talk to everyone and say, I might have, one of you is drunk. I don't know who, but one of you is. Do you think your ability didn't work? Because that can help prove that I'm the Sailor. And so it was a completely different way of fostering conversation around that ability. But I think also ended up being not as much fun for players, because there was this sense of underlying responsibility we noticed with players who felt a little guilty socially about causing someone else to be drunk. And so we didn't want people to feel badly for using their power, which is part of why it changed to, you're going to pick a specific person so that you have agency over that choice. And the choice the storyteller is making becomes a little bit easier, because they're just picking between these two people, which one do I want to make drunk, as opposed to, okay, you can't die. How do I balance that by making somebody else drunk here? So lots of different iteration with these characters. I know there's a couple as well. We've talked about potentially introducing a loric that would allow players to use alternate versions of abilities, because there are some characters where, we iterated up to the point of release and they work, but there are still small changes that we would want to make those characters better. So for example, with the Vortox, we really wanted a version of the Vortox where if you kill a dead player, then that doesn't help the Vortox win the game. We wanted the Vortox to be a little bit more powerful, but that was too powerful. And so we didn't quite find that perfect balance for the Vortox. Another one with the Zomboul, Stephen really wanted a version of the Zomboul where either it kills every night no matter what, so that it has a little bit more power, or a version of the Zomboul where if the players decide to execute a minion who is dead, then the evil team wins the game. So that if you're going to kill dead players to go and hunt for the Zomboul, that it's more risk for the good players in order to do that there's more consequences, and that you really have to be sure you're getting the demon. So there's lots of different ones where there was an idea that, even though we continued iterating, we didn't quite get to an idea that Stephen wanted, but that's okay, because I think the game works pretty well as it is. So
yeah, and it's making space for some new characters to come out that are kind of iterations like you mentioned. So we've also gotten a couple questions about building scripts. Pierre and Katie, have either of you ever made a custom script?
Yes.
Okay. And what was the inspiration for your custom script? What did you start with? Was it a character or a theme?
Well, the inspiration for my custom script was, I think there was something mentioned by, you mentioned, James, before. It's like the good players being like having an incentive to lie or to spread misinformation, which I really liked. And so my custom script was based on outsiders, and especially I wanted outsiders who had like good reason to hide. So I wanted to have a little bit of fun with the experimental outsiders. So I think there was like a damsel, lunatic, of course. So the ogre also. So it was like based around the outsiders, and like there is also a Fangu on the script, so an extra reason for outsider having an incentive to lie. So that was kind of the design around it. And I also added some characters which help these outsiders. For example, I wanted a magician for the lunatic, because I like the idea that you can give the lunatic. So the lunatic is a good player who thinks they are the demon, so they'll pick the demon. So you are going to give them minions and bluffs as if they were a demon, but obviously you can lie about all this information. And if you have a magician, which is yes, maybe I should explain. So the magician is a character that will be shown as one of the minions to the demon. So when there is a magician in play, the demon will wake up and see an extra minion, and obviously they know that one of them is not an actual minion and the magician, so it kind of disrupts the communication within the evil team, because you can't just go talk to your minion and say I'm the demon, because like one of them might be the magician. So that's interesting with the lunatic, because it gives them like a chance not to speak to their minion right away and to figure out right away that they're lunatic. So yeah, that was kind of the inspiration around that script. So.
That sounds like a fun script.
A Fangu outsider-based script where like outsiders have a lot of incentive to lie. And
it sounds really fun. What about you, Katie? Have you ever made a custom script?
Not yet. My players aren't ready for the chaos I'm going to unleash on them yet.
Okay.
So I'm getting them used to all the characters already. And there are so many custom scripts that exist already online that I think I'll start there. And then once they get a feel for it, I will unleash everything. But until then, I'm holding back for now.
Okay.
No, I mean, for sure, there
Understandable.
are lots of really cool scripted experimental characters. So.
And so, Jams, when we talk about custom scripts that TPI has come out with, or even just the characters, where does the inspiration for those come from? Is there a specific thing that you think, oh, I really want to make a character about like zombies, so let's go with the Zomboul? Or do you start with a theme, like, I don't know, Harry Potter, what can we do with the Harry Potter theme script? How does that work?
Yeah, I think for characters and scripts, there's kind of two different, they're similar, but I would say adjacent kind of motivations, where most of the game's design starts with Steven, where he'll say, I've got an idea, or I have a general concept. For all of the expansion scripts, for example, he has this sort of overarching idea, and then his job is to communicate that idea with me and with the rest of our team to make sure that we're able to understand, okay, this is what we're going for. Now we're going to take the characters and try and put that together in a way that works. With the base scripts for the game, actually, Trouble Brewing was sort of the first kind of, okay, we've got everything together. But what I love, one thing I think a lot of people don't realize is that Bad Moon Rising was the original spicy Trouble Brewing, where a lot of the characters on Bad Moon Rising, if you look, actually have a counterpart on Trouble Brewing that's sort of a more basic version. So for example, the Godfather is a really spicy librarian. You learn who the outsiders are and you can kill them. The grandmother is a really spicy washerwoman. You learn a good player in their character, but if they die at night by the demon, you're going to die too. And so it was a lot of, okay, we're going to take a character that's already here and then just crank it up a notch, make it a little bit more interesting. Similarly, Sex and Violets was more of we want to have this sense of a little bit more of an information driven, like almost information overload of, okay, there's lots of information here, but how do we combat that? If the good players have a lot more information, then the evil team needs to be more powerful accordingly to balance that out. So, okay, we're going to give the evil players a lot of power in just a crazy disruptive way so that they can get in the way of some of that information. So for example, the Serenovus, okay, you have a lot of information. That's great. You have to pay a price if you want to tell people that information. And so really trying to play into that balance of like information and consequences. And then Bad Moon Rising also, of course, is giving players just introducing a new mechanic of, okay, you learn things based on who dies, because Trouble Brewing starts with this very standard, very straightforward, every night one person dies. And that's it. And every day you can kill one person. And so that's a really straightforward balance, really easy for players to understand. Whereas on Sex and Violets, there's one reason why you might have more than one death at night. And that's specifically if the pit hag has created a new demon. And so there's, okay, a little new thing. But the main new mechanic that Sex and Violets introduces is madness, which is this idea that you can make people say a certain thing, or you're never going to force somebody to do something or act in a certain way, but you can give them essentially an ultimatum. You can say, you can do this, and if you don't, you might die. And those are your options. And so madness is kind of the big mechanic introduced through Sex and Violets. I think Steven is a big fan of really kind of giving people the space to engage with a new mechanic in a very kind of setting, essentially. And so that's why, Sex and Violets is the first place you encounter madness. It's why actually on Sex and Violets, the characters that deal with madness, the Serenovus and the mutant, both have the word mad in quotations. And we've had a lot of people send an email to the company or send us a message on Discord or something like that. And they say, hey, there's a mistake. In Sex and Violets, the mutant and the Serenovus have quotes, but then the pixie, which is an experimental character that deals with madness, as well as the harpy, those don't have quotes around mad. And so you've made a mistake. You need to make this consistent. That's actually intentional because sex and violence is the first time that players encounter madness. So we wanted to put those quotes around the word mad to draw attention to it, to say this is a new concept. This is something that you might not understand how it works. And so we're going to put it, really highlight it and say mad. That's a new word. That's something you want to be drawn attention to. Whereas when you're playing expansion characters, if you're playing with a harpy, we would hope that you already know what madness is. So when we say mad, we don't need to put that emphasis and attention on it. It's just part of the ability. It's something that you know how it works. Now with our expansion scripts, those also have sort of different conceptual settings that Stephen has created. So for Midnight in the House of the Damned, for example, that one I find really, really intriguing because it's no longer this puzzle of who is good or bad. It's more of a puzzle of, okay, in general, we can kind of figure out who's bad and who's good. That's no longer the puzzle we're trying to solve. The puzzle is now, what do we want to do about that? In Midnight in the House of the Damned, there's lots of different win conditions. So for example, Pierre, you mentioned the damsel earlier. The damsel is a character where they're an outsider, and if the minions can correctly guess who they are, then the evil team wins the game. But there's also an outsider called the heretic, whose ability is the win condition of the game is flip-flopped. And so whoever wins the game, if the evil team would win, then the good team wins instead. And so if you have these characters, together on a script, it all of a sudden becomes this really interesting puzzle where maybe the minions can figure out who that damsel is, but then they're like, do we want to guess who you are or not? And that's what we have to figure out now. And so imagine that, but happening on about, 5 or 6 different win conditions across all different characters. And so it's a completely different feel. And I think ultimately when we are designing these new scripts, we want to make sure that every one that you play has that unique feel so that you really understand this is the game that we're entering into, and this is the space that we're occupying.
Okay. And I think Pierre had a question about the new scripts that are coming out. And we also just got a question in that talks about, other than new characters, abilities, and dynamics, will the next scripts also have new states? And I'm going to let Pierre jump in and ask his question that's kind of related.
Oh, yes. So I was going to ask this, but I also want to say that it's really cool, that I can, each of the script has their own feel. And it's really interesting you mentioned that Bad Moon Rising is the kind of cranked up version of Trouble Brewing, because I never realized that. Because for me, Bad Moon Rising is I think my favorite of the base 3 scripts, just because it feels so unique. It's really when you play Bad Moon Rising, it feels like it's almost like a new experience, when you were the first time you played Trouble Brewing, when you started playing Clocktower, is the whole different experience where suddenly what you're all the mechanics you're used to are completely different, because it's more about indirect information than direct information. I really get the feeling it's a new experience. That's why I really enjoyed this script. So I'm really looking forward to to the new 3 scripts. I guess my question was what's the, because I think you're involved a lot in the playtesting process and everything. So just if you want to mention where at what stage of the playtesting process you are, and what's the process of finishing these expansions?
Yeah, it's a really tricky process, because I think essentially the way that it works is we have an ever-growing list of about, I would say, I don't want to even put a number on it, because it's in the hundreds, somewhere between, let's say, 300 and 400 characters of varying degrees of functionalness that we essentially every week, Stephen and I will meet, and he'll say, this week I'd like you to focus on these specific characters. And so he'll give me, let's say, maybe it's on average, I would say it's 3 or so townsfolk, usually an outsider, 1 or 2 minions, a demon, maybe a traveler, depending on the week. And he'll just give me a pile of characters, and he'll say, I need feedback on these by the time we meet next week. And then, so what's really fun about that is that I basically am given the challenge of make a script that allows you to get a sense of how these characters play together and whether or not they're fun and how they work out, which is really interesting, because I haven't I know there are lots of people in the community who have designed many custom scripts. I'm not one of those people. I design a script every once in a while, but mostly I do these scripts for work. And so it's a very interesting experience, because I'll basically have a list of characters that I need to test and no script to test them on. So I will write down each character, and then I'll just sort of take a moment to think about what are some really interesting characters that interact with this character in a really, really fun and fascinating way. So for example, if I had let's say the Boom Dandy, which is a minion that's already released, and their ability is they want to get executed because that will trigger the end of the game. And so if I was given Boom Dandy, I would sit there and go, okay, what are some really good characters that interact with the Boom Dandy? Well, maybe a poisoner is really good with the Boom Dandy because the poisoner wants to live for a long time, so they could bluff as the Boom Dandy to try and stay alive for longer to use their poisoner ability. Or maybe the damsel is really good with the Boom Dandy because they're an outsider who desperately wants to die, but if they seem like they want to die too much, good players might think they're the Boom Dandy and leave them alive. And so I'll kind of go through and write down maybe 4 or 5 characters for each character we're testing that have really interesting interactions with that character. And then I'll look at my now list of, say, like 30 or so characters, because if I've got like 7 characters and then 4 or 5 that interact with each one, I'll go, okay, is there anything here that's completely broken? So maybe with the Boom Dandy, if I've also written Saint for a different character, I'd go, oh, the Saint and the Boom Dandy, they're not broken, but they don't play sort of in an interesting way with each other. So maybe I'll just pick just one of those. I'll say, okay, I'll get rid of the Saint. And so then I end up having this script. Usually we'll kind of look at it and go, is there anything really broken now that I put this all together? Does this look like it's fun? Is it going to have interesting interactions for these characters? And are the players going to be able to play with these characters in a way that makes sense together? Sometimes I'll have, put the whole script together, and then all of a sudden I'll go, oh, those don't work together. That doesn't work at all, and I'll have to take something off or fix it. But then I'll just print it out, bring it to our group, and say, okay, this is what we're playing. And I've got a couple of other storytellers who will do this as well, so that we can get feedback from different groups, because we really don't want it to be restricted to just one person. Like, it's great if I think something's fun, that's great. I know Stephen trusts me, but I also don't think I should be the one voice on like what is fun for Clocktower players around the world. And so both Stephen and I think it's really important to make sure that we're getting feedback, not just from me and from the games that I'm running, but from multiple different sources, so that we really know, okay, this wasn't just fun in this one setting, but that this is fun kind of overall in lots of different settings. So yeah, we'll run some games. What's interesting, I find, when people think about playtesting and feedback, I often get asked, like, what feedback do you want? What can I tell you about my experience in the game? But that's actually not what we look for when we're looking at feedback from playtesting. What we're looking for is specifically, were the players having fun when they were playing this game? Were they talking a lot? Were they engaged in the puzzle that they were solving? Was it interesting to play with? Was it exciting? And sometimes that excitement and fun can come across in sort of a type 2 sense, where it's like players are frustrated in the moment, but then after the game, one of the biggest things I look for feedback is, when the game ends, what are people talking about? Are they talking about the game? Because I know, I imagine if you've played or experienced Clocktower, you've probably had those experiences where the game ends, instantly everyone is talking about, like, oh my god, when this person did that, or like when the goon turned evil because the cannibal ate them, and it was this crazy, and they're just all talking about like what's happened in the game, and they're so excited and engaged. That's a big sign usually that characters work well, because they're fostering that conversation, they're fostering that connection, they're fostering that excitement in the group. And so after the game, I actually very rarely, if ever, sit down and say, what was your experience in that game? Because I just want to see how it plays out organically. And that's usually where we get that feedback. So in terms of the design process, right now, we're still looking at different characters and basically just getting a better sense of like which characters are really, really working, so that as we kind of plug and play characters onto the actual scripts themselves, we want to make sure that the characters are working the way that we want them to, and that we understand the consequences of those characters with other characters. So yeah, we have kind of mock versions of all of the different scripts, but they are constantly changing and constantly iterating. I've played probably, like 20 different variants of something that could be Garden of Sin or Midnight or the Tomb at least. And they're always different, and they always have different things. I know there's also really tricky things where Stephen will have a couple characters and say, I really want these characters together. And then I'll sit there and go, well, those don't work together. So that's a new problem that we have to fix, is how do we take the essence of what this character does and kind of twist it into a character that works with the other character that you think is really important, and put them together. So it's quite an interesting puzzle. And it's also been quite fun from a design perspective, because sometimes we'll be working on a script and we'll go, this needs a character that doesn't exist yet. And it's like, we've got a list of 400 characters. You'd think surely there's something that does a good enough job at this thing. But then you'll go, no, actually. So for example, for Midnight in the House of the Damned, there was a challenge we were dealing with where there was a character that modified the outsider count, but it did it in a way that wouldn't help players figure out some more important information about the game. And I was like, what if we just had a new character that also modified the outsider count, but in a very particular way that would solve this problem? And then that character now exists. And it's quite a funny thing to be like, okay, we have all these characters and then we're still coming up with new ones constantly. So yeah, it's quite an iterative process, but it is a really fun process. And I don't know, it's very hard genuinely to put a timeline on a process like this, because it's just like when they're right, we know. The Zon actually is a great example of this, which was a minion that we released in November of 2024. From like conception to release, I think was in total about 2 or 3 weeks. Like that was really fast, because we had the idea. We talked back and forth a bit about the idea. And then when the version of the idea that now exists as the character, when we had it, we both were just like, yeah, that's it. Like, didn't even need to test it. We did test it just, to check all our boxes, but we just knew. And I think that's the thing that's tricky about this process, is that it really comes down to like, you get to a point where you're like, yeah, that feels right. And when we get there, they'll be released.
It sounds like it sounds like really, really interesting work. So we're coming up on 50 minutes now. So just so everyone can go to sleep or get started with their Saturday, I'm going to ask one closing question here for everybody, which is, where do you see yourself going with Blood on the Clocktower over the next year or two? What are you interested in exploring or doing differently? Pierre, what do you think about that?
Continue playing for sure. Yeah, just like I'm excited about like the growing community here in France. Like, just continue to grow the community and try new things. Like we have like the new with the Lori character, like trying new variations about the game, maybe new scripts. I was thinking possibly at some point doing some kind of a campaign, like the what was it called, like the campaign format where you change characters like when they get executed. That sounds sounds quite fun too, maybe at some point. But yeah, but more basically just continue playing the game
okay.
And also like more simpler version of the game, because we also do a lot of just this good old trouble brewing and like for beginners, which is always good, and for experienced player it's always nice too.
Definitely. Okay, what about you, Katie?
Oh, I'm so excited. Like I mentioned, I got the carousel today, so that's going to be a thing. Custom scripts, I might try my own custom script. We'll see how that goes. I might send some emails or messages to people and be like, help, but we'll see. And honestly, just playing more games with people in France, because I've never played online. I'm all in person for now. So it's really getting, the feel with the people, and I don't know, just widening the community and getting more people as hooked as I am, which I'm not sure is possible, but I think it's possible. And I will do it. I will convert everyone. But it's such a fun game. And I know that for my friends, in any case, once they're hooked, that's it. Like, we are playing regularly all the time, as you'll see on our videos. And it's just, I don't know, I just can't wait for everyone to be able to try it. So yeah, I'm just really excited.
And what do you have coming up in your next video?
So we just released the video today.
Okay.
Where, I can't give it away, you'll have to watch, but it's another trouble brewing.
Okay.
And then we have a couple of Christmas specials in the mix. And then coming next year is when we're going to start really on the Bad Moon Rising, and I will pronounce it correctly, Sect and Violets. I really have to think about that one every time I say it. But I'm really excited. And what's great is that people, I put as much information as I can in the videos so that people afterwards can watch it and then get their friends involved and really understand the whole process of everything that's happening. So I'm just excited for people to get more involved and keep asking questions about the game. And yeah, I'm hoping one day I'll actually play the game too. And you never know, I might find myself with some of the people here playing a game, you never know. So watch this space.
Yeah, we can get together and play a game.
Love it.
If you're ever in Paris, like, feel free.
And what about you, Jams? What's on the horizon in the next year that you are just super excited about? Anything you can tell us, let us know.
I think for now, it's mostly just continuing to work on the design of the expansion specifically, make sure that we can get those out as soon as possible while still making them like as amazing as I know they can be. And beyond that, I think just continuing to have fun with the game is really important for me, because obviously, you know, all the time people go like, it's your job. Like, does it feel like work when you're playing? And I think it's really, really valuable. I've got a group of friends here in Sydney, and we play board games in general every Sunday pretty much, and at some point everyone's like, let's play Clocktower, and it's lovely to just have a setting where I can just go and play, and it doesn't matter that I work on the game. It's just I'm just another player in the game just having fun. So I think beyond actually working and designing the game, really making sure that I can also continue to just have fun playing it as well.
Okay, sounds good. Well, thank you all so much for joining us today to help us launch the French thinking in French here, helping us launch the French crowdfunding campaign. When we first started this video, we were at over 100 people that had signed up, and we will be going for 2 months. So I'm super excited. Thank you all for being here, and have a good evening, Pierre and Katie, and have a good morning, Jams. And thank you, everybody who's watching us. Bye, everybody.
Amazing. Thank you.